Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. Today, I wanted to talk about the Tale of 4 Dungeons and answer the question, are they worth doing in Wizard101? Now obviously there are 4 dungeons, so there's going to be 4 separate parts of this video. If for some reason you want to know if one of them specifically is worth doing, but you don't really care about the rest, obviously you can skip through the timestamps in either the description or just scroll through, you'll be able to see, and pick which one you want to know most about, or you can stay and watch the entire video. Now the Tale of 4 Dungeons, if somehow you don't know, are a set of 4 dungeons that was released in November of 2014. Yes, that is 11 years ago now, where at 4 separate levels you can go to these dungeons and they all have unique gear sets that they drop. They might have some other unique drops, and they are quite long dungeons with interesting and unique stories for each one. Now these 4 dungeons are Kembaalung Village unlocked at level 25, Barkingham Palace unlocked at level 40, Zigazag unlocked at level 60, and finally Castle Darkmoor unlocked at level 100, not to be confused with the new world that's being released very soon, Darkmoor itself, which now that I think about it is going to be a bit confusing for new players because they won't know whether you're talking about Darkmoor the world or Darkmoor the dungeon. But obviously this video we're talking about Castle Darkmoor, which is the dungeon unlocked at level 100. Now I'm going to give a rundown of the dungeon, quickly how difficult it is, you know, how long it is, and then I'll talk about some of the unique and important drops, and then talk about whether you want to do it or not. So without further ado, let's get into the video and let's answer the question, are the Tale of 4 Dungeons worth doing? So fun fact, I was looking at it and apparently my death never did Kembaalung Village. And if that doesn't tell you really what you need to know about this dungeon, I don't know what does. Kembaalung Village is not the longest dungeon in the world. It's unlocked at level 25, and while it's not particularly difficult, it can be a bit difficult for that level. The average enemy health, like the mob enemies, have about 700 health, the bosses have about 1300 plus, and generally there's no important cheats to talk about. There are 2 parts to the dungeon. The first part is going through a tower with the Dalai Lama, and then the second one is to go through this like bigger dungeon that you end up finding Beagle at, which I keep wanting to call him Deputy Beagle, which is a completely different guy. That's a character from Fallout New Vegas, not from Wizard101. Basically, the entire point of the dungeon is to rescue him. He is one of the Marleybonian expedition people that has gone missing because, yeah, he's gone missing, which kind of sucks. So we have to go to this area and save him. And it's honestly not too bad. It's not that long of a dungeon. I would say for the average level 25, it's not going to take you more than an hour to complete the entire thing, and upon repeated farmings of it, it's not going to be anything particularly difficult. Hollow Mountain, if you're at level 25, might take you like 30 minutes on average, and then the Pagoda of Harmony is probably going to take less time, maybe about 20 minutes. The only real enemy I think of note in this entire place is in Hollow Mountain is the final boss, Master Tonkatsu, who has like 1300 health, and he has a cheat that will constantly damage you, which can be a bit dangerous for level 25, so be wary of that. I wouldn't recommend soloing this dungeon for sure. It's not going to be the easiest, but I digress. Let's get into actually whether this dungeon is worth doing and whether you should do it. Well, beyond the XP, there isn't any particular drops here that are going to be that valuable to you because Mount Olympus is in 5 levels, which is going to take you next to no time at all. So if you're doing this for actual gear itself, it's going to be pretty pointless, except for one simple exception, and that is for balance. Now, balance can unlock a very specific amulet from 2 separate drops from Master Tonkatsu, which is the final drop, and the wooden skeleton key boss room, the Temple Phantom. They both drop an amulet for balance level 25 that gives feint. And if that doesn't immediately go, wow, that's useful, then you should know being able to use that feint and also stacking a regular feint on top of it, it's going to make it so easy to do literally like every early game boss, and that amulet will be so useful all the way up until you get Jewel of the Feint at level 50, and then that'll carry you to like level 100. Basically, the point is it is going to be an exceptional damage increase for balance and for obviously anyone that quests with that balance. So if you're a balance, I would actually highly recommend you do this dungeon. Now, beyond that, in terms of other drops, realistically, I think the only thing that's really dropped from Kembaalung Village is apparently wooden skeleton keys drop here pretty frequently. So if you ever have wanted wooden skeleton keys and you've ever wanted to farm them, apparently the main dungeon, the Hollow Mountain part of the dungeon, the Master Tonkatsu and the other bosses do drop wooden skeleton keys semi-frequently. That could potentially be worth farming, but otherwise, I really don't think that there's a single thing worth farming in this dungeon. All right, next up we have Barkingham Palace, which is unlocked at level level 40 by talking to Private Kinchley right here in Regent Square. He'll send you on a short little quest to go talk to Sherlock Bones, and then Sherlock Bones is just gonna be like, yo, let's go to Barkingham Palace. And I was gonna try to do a British accent, but I've just decided I can't. So instead he's just like, yo, what's up, dude? Let's go to Barkingham Palace. It'll be sick, bro. And then you go to Barkingham Palace and he's all like, yeah, you gotta save the queen or something. And you go through the entire dungeon to save the queen. Now, it turns out that there's a mad kind of doctor guy, which, you know, obviously we've met Dr. Von Cassenheim before and we kind of know that there's some crazy doctors in Marleybone, but Dr. Jackal here in the rooftop is going to be the main guy that gives all the drops. Realistically, this dungeon is quite difficult compared to what you'd expect for this level. Level 40, generally the enemies have probably 2,000 to 3,000 health at most in terms of bosses. Like if we're talking in late Mushu to early Dragonspire, it's not going to be anything too difficult, but this is a difficulty spike and a half because most of these bosses have about 5,000 health. Chief Whip has a cheat that allows him to spam rebirth, I believe, which really sucks. This dungeon is going to be quite a bit hard for your level compared to like literally anything else you're going to be doing around level 40. So keep that in mind. Barkingham Palace is quite difficult. Now, in terms of drops, is it worth doing? Well, I will say it's probably worth to do it once just for the XP, if even. Beyond that, I don't think there's anything particularly necessary here. Barkingham Palace gear, the gear that's dropped from Dr. Jackal at the very end of the dungeon, is better than Mount Olympus gear. So you'd expect it to be, given that it's 10 levels after Mount Olympus. However, is it good enough to the point where it's worth farming? I would say no. And there's a few reasons why. First off, the fact that this dungeon has done significantly less than Mount Olympus. So in team up, you're going to be struggling to find a team to go through it much more than you would if you were trying to get through Mount Olympus. And then on top of that, there's just the fact that generally the gear isn't enough of an increase. It's like probably about 6 to 8 damage overall if you got all of the gear. So if you think that 8 damage is worth potentially, you know, spending 8 to 10 hours farming this dungeon, yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's worth it. I personally never really do this dungeon outside of once. In terms of other drops that are worth it, Chief Whip drops a ring at this level, which can be useful. It's a ring that gives a damage, which for all of the schools, that can be very beneficial to have a ring that does damage this early on in the game. I believe that the boss that I just killed in the background that you saw there also can drop some rings, but it's not going to be like anything that I would say is worth farming because I don't think that that 4% damage potentially on that ring is going to be worth spending a bunch of time farming for it, when in that time you could just be questing and get to the point where you get a ring that does damage anyway at like level 50. So I digress. I would say that Barkingham Palace is not worth doing. So far, we're 0 for 2 in dungeons worth doing. All right, next up at level 60, we have Zigazag, which I believe you start the quest by coming to Alhazred here in the Balance School in Krokotopia. So we're back in Krokotopia again, and he will send you to Prospector Zeke, who will send you back to Alhazred, who then takes you to the statue, and you go to a separate part of Krok called Zigazag, specifically Upper Zigazag, that has the House of Scales and the Lower Zigazag. So it's once again a 2-part dungeon. Now, you come to Lower Zigazag, you free a bunch of Mander slaves again, and then you beat the first guy, which I don't really know how to say his name, but I'm going to throw him up on the screen right here. This guy, who has some quite interesting drops that I'll talk about more in depth a little bit later. And then finally you get through the House of Scales, you do a few puzzles, you beat a few bosses, and then finally you get to Amit the Devourer, the final boss that drops mostly all of the Zigazag gear. Now, I will say Zigazag is actually quite a longer dungeon, and a lot of people don't do it in comparison to Waterworks. So in terms of just generally that, I would say that Zigazag isn't worth doing in that regard, because this dungeon right here is probably going to take 30 plus minutes, and compare it to Waterworks where it's much more easily accessible. There's the respawn glitch with Waterworks where you can exit the room and come back into the final room and the final boss will respawn. That guy is just hammering away at nothing. Huh. What you building there, bud? You know, intriguing. I'm going to take a screenshot of this, and that's my thumbnail. Boom. All right, we continue on. Just generally, this dungeon is done less than other dungeons, and that alone makes it almost not worth farming. And I do find that the drop rate on this gear is pretty low as well. So keep that in mind before I talk about what the actual gear is itself and whether you want to farm it. You can very much get away with not farming this gear, and the drop rate, again, is quite low. So if that kind of turns you off from it, just stick with Waterworks instead. But let's talk about the gear itself. Now, some of you may may know, Zigazag gear strictly on paper, the hat and the robe, are better than Waterworks, and they are actually a decent amount better. They tend to be a bit more offensive, so they'll have like an extra 2% damage and higher critical as well, which crit doesn't really matter, but they do have higher damage. And so if you're like a fire, a storm, a myth, or a death, that might interest you. It also gives a mass convert card, which is like 16 levels, I think, earlier than you would be able to train it naturally. So that could be useful as well if you want mass convert, but otherwise nothing too interesting. However, there is one thing I want to talk about, and that is in this first dungeon, the final boss of this dungeon, which again, I don't know how to pronounce his name, actually drops amulets that have damage on them, which is incredibly rare. And as far as I know, this might be the only amulets in the entire game that have damage. So if you're looking to purely maximize your damage, realistically, it might be a good idea to get these amulets. It's dropped by the final guy, and I don't know how much they're dropped like frequency wise, but I would imagine it's not the best. So if you want, you can do this dungeon. You just kind of beat a bunch of mobs and then like 2 bosses. And I believe the last guy spams the Leviathan spell. So if you're doing this at level 60, it might actually be quite challenging to do. But if you do fight that final boss and get the amulet drop that gives that damage, that might genuinely be probably the best amulet. You can get up to the 100+ range, and an amulet that lasts you for 40 levels is going to be really good. So if you've ever wanted an amulet that has damage, or you've ever wanted to just fully damage max in this game, Zigazag is the way to go, and you want to do it. Now, generally, is Zigazag worth it? I would say no. I would do it at least once. This guy is also building on nothing. That's kind of crazy. I would say do it at least once to get the XP, because it does give quite a bit of XP, and if you do this and Waterworks, you're going to be gaining like a full 2 levels at level 60 for free, basically, and you only do it once, so you know, worth it in that regard. But unless the gear really entices you, I don't think it's worth it to do it, which means we're 0 for 3 in terms of the Tale of 4 dungeons. But luckily, we got Castle Darkmoor to save us in the final stretch. All right, the final Tale of 4 dungeons dungeon being Castle Darkmoor, unlocked at level 100. You speak to Dworgen here in the Death School in Nightside, and he'll basically tell you, whoa, Malastair is back, and he's challenged you to some kind of duel by the right of Khan Devasi, which is like a duel to the death or something. So it's kind of metal as hell, actually. You do just straight up kill Malastair here, which is actually the second time we've done that. We've killed Malastair twice now, which is a little crazy. The Darkmoor dungeon itself is split up into 3 zones. There's the first Castle Darkmoor dungeon, which doesn't really have anything to speak of in terms of drops. There is the second part of the dungeon, which you can use these to get back to the dungeon whenever you want. And there's also a skeleton key boss right here, Bun Feratu. In the upper halls has Shane Von Chain, which it's his bat form, which he does have a single drop, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And then obviously the final section has Yevgeny, Shane Von Chain, the storm version in the mech, and then finally Malastair himself, who you duel one after another in one of the more challenging dungeons for this game, a level 100 dungeon that is quite difficult. Now, the drops themselves, let's just talk about the fact that yes, the drops are worth it. The Darkmoor gear is incredibly good and will last you all the way up to like level 140 plus, which is insanely good for a gear set. There are some insanely good drops as well, like the Shane Von Chain in the upper halls drops one of the best amulets all the way up to like level 150, which is insane as well. Like it gives a bunch of resist as well. There's the fact that Yevgeny drops a great Athame, which you might not even have the Blade of Felled Titan anymore if they've nerfed Cronus's drops or if you didn't farm that. So getting the Yevgeny Athame from this first fight is going to be really good. Aphrodite, who is a secret key boss directly to the left when you enter the final section here, also drops good rings for level 100. Now, I probably wouldn't recommend farming those because no one really does Aphrodite, and Aphrodite is quite a bit difficult of a boss compared to some of these other ones, but she does in fact drop a ring. If you have stone skeleton keys, you can do Aphrodite as well. On top of that, doing Darkmoor once is going to net you a bunch of XP, and also it's going to give you the ability to use the shadow spell, which some of them are more worth it than others, but at the very least, like Storm gets glow bugs, which is insanely good. I believe Fire gets fire from above, which sucks now. So I don't know why I brought that up. I think I just wanted to roast the fact that fire isn't as good as it used to be. But I digress. I would say Darkmoor as a whole is definitely worth doing at least once, and you definitely want to probably farm that Malastair gear, because if you can get a full set of Malastair gear, especially if we're talking about the Yevgenia Thame, and then, you know, also potentially even the Shane Von Chain Amulet, you're going to be set for at least 40 levels, and you're going to very much appreciate the fact that you did it, because if you don't do it, you are going to struggle through like the higher levels. I mean, obviously there are other options to Darkmoor gear. You can get like Chrysalis World gear and stuff now, so you're not going to be struggling that much, but it's not going to be nearly as easy if you have like, you know, max level Darkmoor gear, which is just going to be really, really good. So with that, I think we've pretty much gone over every one of the Tale of Four dungeons. So just to briefly go over it again, I would say all of them are worth doing at least once. However, the only ones that are worth farming are Zigazag if you really, really want that damage gear, and obviously Castle Darkmoor, which I'm sure most of you knew clicking on this video that Castle Darkmoor was going to be there, because Darkmoor gear is very much some of the best gear for the level in this game compared to, you know, out of every gear set. So I hope this video was useful to you. I hope you found it to be enjoyable. I think tomorrow is going to be the day I finally start doing my Let's Play again. So if you've been looking forward to that, be excited, because I'm moving over to console. We're going to switch it up a little bit, play a more interesting School Than Death. So I hope to see you there. If not, that's fine too. I'm still going to be making regular videos throughout the week, like 3 to 4 times a week. I'll still be making regular videos. The Let's Play isn't going to completely take over my channel. Don't worry about that. But I digress. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a fantastic day.